At AV&R, our mission is to humanize robotics. We decided to create this podcast series to help you demystify the world of robotics and discover what some of the brightest minds in the field are doing. Welcome to Robotics for All Podcasts by AV&R.
Carl Doeksen is the Global Robotics and Automation Director at 3M, where he leads teams to accelerate full robotic and fixed automation solutions for 3M's industrial customers around the world. To say the least, Carl is active in the robotics industry. He serves on the board of directors of the Robotics Industry Association, as well as the International Federation of Robotics, Markram and Suppliers Committees. Carl always has fantastic insights and data about the robotics market, and he just finished up the 2022 A3 Business Forum. This is a world-leading annual networking event bringing together robotics, vision imaging, motion control, and AI professionals. We get to hear about some of the freshest insights of where the industry is going, what are the latest trends, and the expectations people are talking about for 2022 and beyond. Hope everyone enjoys the show. Here we go. Hi, Carl. Thanks for joining me today.
Hey, Michael. Great to be here. Thanks. Looking forward to this.
Yeah, we got quite a few things to chat about. You're coming off an interesting week. You were saying visiting the A3 Business Forum. Maybe just start off and talk about a little bit about what the A3 is for those listeners that maybe aren't familiar with it and how you're involved with it.
Yeah. A3, it stands for the Association for Advancing Automation. And it's a relatively new organization. It's the merging of three great legacy organizations, the RIA, the Robotics Industries Association, the Vision Association, as well as the Motion Control Motor Association. Officially came together as one, governing body. Now that's about 1,200 members, and I'd say it's really the premier organization with our branch A3 Mexico that covers North America. Really is the association for anybody in the robotics industry, and I happen to be on the board, the technical strategy board of the robotics group, which was formerly the Robotics Industry Association board. Now it's the Tech Strategy Board for robotics. And there are, one last thing, there's 4 tech strategy boards. There's a Vision Tech Strategy Board, there's a Robotics Tech Strategy Board, there's a Motion Control and Motors Tech Strategy Board, and then there's our newest one, Artificial Intelligence Tech Strategy Board. And those are really the 4 pillars of the A3 now. Great. If anybody out there is interested, I really want to give a shout out to Jeff Bernstein, who's president of the A3, and his team did a spectacular job last week. And I hope we get to talk more about it, because many highlights from that great event.
Yeah, definitely. AV&R is a member of the A3, and I love going into it's got a good online portal, and I love going in there and checking out the quarterly stats and seeing how the industry. It's a great source to see how the industry is doing, where there's growth or where things are slowing down. So I'm really interested to hear about what was talked about, and so maybe to start before that, what's the Business Forum? So this is a yearly conference, and it gathers. Who does it gather together?
Well, of course, all the members are invited, and I would say this group has very much morphed into more of a eclectic group over the years, where certainly the legacy group was it mainly was comprised of the robot OEMs in their group, and then the vision companies in their group, and then the motion control motor people in their group. But what's been exciting, and that's when there were just a few dozen members in each group.
Yeah.
Of course, now each group has hundreds of members, and it's a, like I mentioned, it's a collection of user companies like 3M and our colleagues at Procter and Gamble and other companies like that are users of robotics, vision and motion control motor systems, but also um, academia. There are members from around the country, to name a few: Lake Superior State University, Georgia Tech, very active in the group, as just two examples. But one of the things, Michael, I'd say that's been most exciting are the number of startup companies that have
Okay.
joined and now come to this event. There were just in attendance, I believe there were over 30 startup companies. And in addition to that, I'm looking at the stats, member stats. I believe we have over 40 startup companies, that are
Yep.
typically funded by venture capital and other larger companies.
Okay.
And yeah,
And these would be North American-based startup companies.
yeah, that's interesting. You should mention that. Predominantly,
Okay.
we had what I noticed this year anyway. They're definitely, and I've been attending this event for a number of years, but and we have it most years. It's mostly people from North America, mostly
Okay.
U.S. and Canada. Um, However, this year there were a lot, I'd say, from Germany, many
Oh yeah.
German
Okay.
companies. So that was encouraging. But this year, not as many from Asia. Normally we would have, I'd say, 10-15% of the attendees would come in from Japan and China, Korea,
Yeah.
Taiwan. But of course, not many people traveling from Asia these days. But
Yeah. It's
Europe,
pretty.
Europe very much seems, despite Omicron, the Germans made it to the A3 Business Forum, and I really like to thank them for coming over. It was just a great to see people live, to watch live presentations, to do the networking in between breaks. Just a very, very important event that made it feel like, you know, we'll never be back to normal, but at least there's some resemblance of a normal business forum event here.
Yeah. Yeah. The startup stat that you had there, I find that interesting because when I started, you know, doing this podcast, one of the things that
Hmm.
I became curious about was there was new companies coming out, and let's go back 6, 7, 8 years ago, and there wasn't many startups necessarily um, in automation, industrial robotics. There was new integrators, new companies that were coming out, but not startups per se. And then I started noticing that Silicon Valley was taking more interest in manufacturing, in robotics
Yeah,
startups, and
yeah,
there seemed to be a new kind of a breath of air. And when I started digging around, I realized that, okay, North America, maybe we were behind in sparking some of that startup. And I found there was a lot of new companies, startups per se, new robotic offerings coming out of Asia that, and we were kind of lagging on that. So it's good to hear that
yeah.
we're seeing more startups. And I'm curious, what type, is there a theme of types of startups, or is it, um,
Yeah, oh, I would say there absolutely is, and I think that what we've noticed, um, the startup companies are very much focused on software,
okay,
offline programming, and I'd call it the open source initiative. The ROS type of initiative. These are the startups are, they are they'll say, no code robotics or low code robotics, trying to really um, democratize, robotics, number one, but number two, just make it easier for manufacturing to use industrial robots. And I think that's where the startups, and again, in the startup world, it's very competitive, hyper competitive.
Yeah.
We rarely hear about, for that one startup that works, we rarely hear about the 8 or 9 that failed. And but some of these are going to make it. And you know, who one of them will be, like, the Linux or you know, uh, Windows of the computer, I mean, of the robotics industry, where lots of, during the entire conference, many parallels drawn to um, the computer and mobile phone businesses on what caused those devices to become available to the masses. And
Okay.
I'd say that's where these startup companies they're really focused on that, and most of their pitch decks have this vision of a world of 30, 40, 50 million industrial robots around the world. And
Okay.
of course, today there's probably an installed base of around only, 3 million or so,
Yep.
uh, from the IFR data. But so that's a completely different world. And these startups are focused on bringing down those barriers for enabling that world. It's really exciting.
Yeah. For many years, the industrial space, we've had the different colored robot arms, the
Yeah,
Fennecs, the ABBs,
right.
and they all had their plus and minuses, right? So all really good product, but each one was used. Maybe they would define a niche for themselves. So you see a world, or people are saying there's a world where it doesn't matter what color you are. There's an operating system that can make it easy to use any robot. That's
Yep.
the
And
vision.
yeah, and when we talk to these startups, they all tend, as they say, be robot agnostic.
Yeah.
And Michael, I think AV&R and our applications that we're focused on, um, grinding, polishing, sanding, deburring, these are very challenging, where the
Yeah.
programmers, even, it's not just the teach pendant itself. Um, it's it's how long does it take a programmer to be productive
Yeah.
before you even allow them in a customer's plant, to be uh, adjusting the robot. So these guys are. I had another meeting today here in Minneapolis with another startup company that attended the event, and wow, I just think it's not a question of if, it's more when, and it's not perfect, but every year these platforms get better and better, and it's
Yeah.
going to be exciting to see when people, almost any kind of, like, the parallels are there. When IBM, you used to have to, if you wanted your computer, you had to buy it from them. You had to buy the software. They had to write all the software. They had to train your people on how to run the computer. In many cases, IBM did the integration, and so, the IBMs of the robotics industry are having to change, and they're being challenged by many of these startup companies that are popping up. And especially in America, I'd say, you know, the whole Boston
Yeah.
area is a hot, and your neck of the woods, Quebec, Montreal. I mean, that is just a real hot spot for many of these startups, as is Silicon Valley, of course. And all of them I've talked to also they kind of come out of a university environment. So they are
Okay.
graduate students or postdoc students that decide to start a company and change the world.
So from your opinion, because you got to talk to a few, what has is there something you could put your finger on that's allowed this change to happen?
Um, well, I have to believe that it's the marketplace is driving it, and
Yeah,
that and what's happened here, we saw this, Michael, even pre-pandemic, that there weren't enough people to fill the void in manufacturing jobs.
yeah,
And just in the United States, um, there was much talk about almost about it's 800, 900,000, almost a million manufacturing jobs are open right now, in the
wow,
United
okay,
States. And it's as we went into the dark days of the pandemic, and now even as we're coming out of it, this labor shortage um, is, I'd say, accelerating this need, and we've definitely during the pandemic have seen a flurry of these startups. And if you really think about it, the constraint, we talk to our customers and they'd say things like, yeah, we'd love to automate, we'd love to be doing all this polishing with robots. However, we don't have an engineering department. We don't,
yeah,
we're not big like 3M. We don't have robotic scientists and technicians to program the robots. And then you say, oh, well, you should hire some. Okay. And try to do that.
yeah.
I
Try and
was
find those
I
people.
was
Yeah,
talking, Lake Superior State that was attending the show, one of the top schools for robotics in Michigan. Um, they were, saying that their graduates have 6 or 7 job offers coming out of, off a 4-year degree in robotics, or now they have a mechatronics program.
yeah,
It's competitive,
yeah,
and that filters down. That's just the engineers. What about the technicians? What about the operators, the trade people that have to run the robots?
yeah,
So the demand is there, and again, just like we saw in other industries, it's these interfaces, these scan to path, scan to plan, you know, haptic methods of getting code, the robot to do its paths is they're not really good, I would say. However, they're
yeah,
getting better every single day. These guys
yeah,
are improving them, and we really need to keep an eye on that, and because it's going to be just more broadly easier and easier to program the robots, and it will require less training to
yeah,
to be an effective programmer.
yeah, yeah. I A couple of years ago, the big theme was design for manufacturing. So, and there's a lot of companies still working to make sure they have 3D models for all the
Mm-hmm.
production they do. And that's a great step forward. And then you know, what you're talking about, the scan to and plan, that would enable that whole group of folks that potentially don't have the 3D models, don't have all that other
Built.
infrastructure
Right.
to make it easy.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean the opportunities are it's just it's fascinating. I think even in the short time I've really been involved in the robotics industry, um, we've seen this pivot from the mechanical aspects, the mechanical kind of intellectual property, to now it's all about the software, and
Yeah,
and what how are you going to be able to differentiate yourself through software,
yeah,
and yeah, and more importantly, as we draw on academia and our association works with the industry, it's arguably a lot of talk at the conference that software engineering, computer science is becoming more important than the traditional kind of mechanical double E type degree. That, there aren't a lot of engineers that get to build robots, but
Yeah.
there's demand for millions of them that can program robots.
My feeling is, in general, doesn't matter what career. So I've got
Yeah.
my one son. He wants to be. He's got a vision to be a lawyer. But what I think is, in the future, any profession you choose, you got to almost have a minor in computer science, because the person that is able to
Exactly.
master a
Right.
profession and then
Right.
understands how to apply computers to it, you're going to have an edge, and it might be required at one point.
Yeah, Michael, it's funny you should say that, because in our membership committee meeting, which was on Monday morning this week, we spent a lot of time talking about that the council should get that minor in computer science, no matter
Yeah.
what degree. If it's chemi, mechanical engineering, double E, industrial engineering, mathematics, whatever your degree, the law, liberal arts,
Yeah.
pick up that minor in computer science, because wow, being able to apply your ideas in the engineer of the future. And we see that at 3M, the engineers that have a strong software background are really the ones that are changing the game. They can
Yeah.
apply their science to reduce it to practice because of their knowledge of Python or C++ or whatever the languages. That really makes a difference.
Yeah. Totally. Totally. Now, one of the things I was looking at, when I heard you were going to the business forum, and we were chatting to get ready for this, um, I was I had looked before Christmas on the A3 website, and they've got the members vault, right, where there's some pretty
Right,
cool data.
right.
And I checked yesterday, the Q4 stats aren't out, but in Q3, so you and I, we spend a lot of time in finishing, right?
Right.
And they were talking about the growth in the robotics market. For me, the light switch went on in June 2021. That's where
Mm-hmm.
I said, okay, everybody's back in the shop and realizing they got to get work done. And whether or not the pandemic will go away, everyone has a job to do. And the stats kind of reflected that. And it talked about, in metals, and it's very broad, so I don't know if you have more insight into this, but in
Mm-hmm.
metals, there was a 183% increase in robotic sales. So I find
Yep.
that really
Yep.
interesting. And is there traditionally the trend was in automotive sector for robotics, also semiconductors, a lot of cell phone. Are we continuing to see a growth outside of those big areas, in things such as metals and finishing processes?
We really are, Michael, and that was again, I'd say, one of the highlights of the show. And the robotics industry, especially in the U.S., because of General Motors. Obviously that was kind of the genesis of the industrial robot arm, and the rest is history. However, because of the low mix, high volume nature of automotive assembly, that's kind of where all the robots have been going, at
Yeah.
least in the US and Europe. In Asia, there's, like you mentioned, another big market is the electronics market. Uh, but what's happening here in the last 2 years has been, um, for the first time ever, quarterly numbers, shipments of robots um, in non-automotive industries are bigger than automotive. That was a real inflection point, and it started to happen toward the end of 2020, where all of a sudden, automotive slows down a bit, and then the broader based, metalworking and markets especially, have picked up. And you're right, the A3 and then kind of the governing association, IFR, which really produces the Bible on when it comes to statistics, has not historically broken out our applications, polishing, sanding, deburring, all that. We believe they will soon, and that application's destined to be a mainstream application, just like welding, assembly, handling. Those are the big, sort of sexy applications.
Yep.
However, a lot of talk at the conference about broadly material removal as an application, and then of course the other, autonomous mobile robots, the logistical, the logistics side of automation, as well as many new applications. It's just can be fun to go onto YouTube and search
Yeah.
new robot, and you get some amazing videos. I think they have robots now that can climb up coconut trees and pick the coconuts off.
Yeah.
By the way, harvesting coconuts is very, very dangerous. For the people that have to do that. I mean, it sounds a little bit funny, but the fact that now a robot can do that is just a blessing to those workers and their families.
So
Anyway.
there's a YouTube of robots harvesting coconuts out
Oh
there.
yeah, right.
Okay,
right.
I'm gonna have
Yep.
to check that out. Yeah.
Yeah, it is wicked cool. It is a neat one.
We we've got a company that we partnered up with here in Montreal, Nexus Robotics, that they're into agriculture, and that's a really cool one. But
Oh yeah.
so they've built a machine for picking weeds, and they focus on a specific crop,
hmm
and their role is to run this machine and pick weeds through the thousands of acres
Yeah.
of crops. And I can attest from having to, well, I picked a lot of rocks when I was a kid,
Right. So
and
did I.
that was the worst job. That's a good reason to go to school. So if anyone has kids that doesn't want to go to school, send them out in the field and ask them to pick rocks, because it's a never-ending job. But yeah, it's not dangerous, but it's definitely dull and it's definitely dirty, right?
Yeah, and I picked the rocks, and I tell you what, I got sunburned when I did it,
That's
and
true.
to this, I'm sure all that wasn't good for my. So there, some of these, dirty, dull, dangerous. Sometimes we say demeaning, the 4Ds. Those applications are, really um, good for humanity. And I on the A3 Business Forum, I felt for the first time that the trade press, the media, the that in the robotics world, there's always a certain undertone of this dark side that robots are going to take over the
Yeah.
world, and
Yeah.
you don't need cashiers, you don't need people to make coffee, you don't need people to make pizza, because it's all going to be done by robots, and robots are stealing everybody's job. And we the data doesn't support that. And usually at these conferences, we spend a lot of time with economists and stats showing the correlation between robot density and employment levels, and how um, you know robots um, add to the I mean, and Amazon is a poster child of that. The
Yep.
more robots the amount of robots they've added has kind of gone up in a linear fashion, but the number of employees they've been able to hire has gone up exponentially. So if that's a case study for how robots drive productivity and enable more jobs. However, this year we weren't on the defensive. It's all of a sudden the world has fell in love with robots, and robots have their place in society um, as a a helper, and that there are jobs that nobody wants anymore, and
Yeah.
and that's a reality that really I think got accelerated because of the pandemic.
Hmm.
That it for the average person, non-robotics nerds like you and I, um, a robot isn't as much this threat to um, the workforce that it
Yeah.
once was.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a shift for sure in the industrial setting or in the manufacturing setting. I think I don't know what year I would put it at, but it's a couple years I've seen quite a few examples of people embracing robots, and so there's a lot of good stories out there. I think in the once you get outside of that, and when the robotics get out of their cage and start mingling with people, there's still a lot of
Right,
work to do on
right.
regulation. We shared some info on LinkedIn, but there's that example for in Toronto where the regulation just hasn't caught up with the speed of innovation. So, right
Yeah,
now there's a temporary ban on robots on sidewalks
yeah.
because people don't understand them and they're
I
nervous about it,
remember
right?
I remember you and I talked about that. Yeah. I
Yeah.
know. It's
So
a
there's still
it's
some
a
work there. Yeah.
it's a kind of an education thing. And
Yeah.
one of my greatest coming out of the conference again, we were fortunate. Greg Smith from Teradyne, well, he runs Teradyne's automation business. He was one of the speakers. And he had a line that I'm going to use a lot. Um, he said, people do not people are not good robots, and robots are not good people.
Hmm.
And that really resonated with me because the things a robot can do, robots are really good at, repetitive, precise, um, non-stop, boring, you know, you name it. And and then, well, what are humans good at? Well, humans, this creative, strategic, um, still there's many things that humans can
Yeah.
do. At least the robots cannot do them yet. We shall
The AI is
see. But
coming.
yeah, yeah. However, I really like that line that people are not good robots and robots are not good people. And so and I've seen that personally, with people working in factories doing those horrible jobs, watching their lives improve and their families' lives improve when they took on the robot and learned how to program it and troubleshoot, and even if they were doing manual grinding or whatever, now they have a skill. They're very proud of it. In the manufacturing shop floor, the job bands
Yep.
tend to be much more lucrative when you have just a basic understanding of robotics
Yep.
and where they fit into your company's workflow. And so yeah, it's it's a lot of fun right now.
Yeah. Now, you're always good with stats, so I gotta ask, do you have a feeling for last year, uh, the size of the finishing market for a number of new robots? Do you, because you're right,
Yeah,
they don't break it down necessarily.
no,
So I know you guys do a lot of,
we do.
estimating and
Right, right.
yeah.
And I do want to, give a little shout out to our friends at ATI, Industrial Automation,
Okay.
and their new parent company, Novanta. We feel sometimes 3M and ATI are, we're really trying to, the rising tide will lift all the boats, and we have a line of sight to a world where material removal starts to show up on those lists of welding, assembly, handling, pick and place. And it's not quite there yet. But our data, I'd say, Michael, from around the world, that the amount of new material removal robots coming online in a given year can bounce around between 10,000 robots. New ones. And compare that to welding, where I think last year, for the first time, it went over 100,000, new welding robots. And of course, at the current IFR stats, that the world is on a pace of about 400,000 new robots every year, new ones come online. And then they have a useful life, so the IFR does a great job of estimating how many are being decommissioned and going offline, and hence you get your installed base out there. But we have line of sight. Material removal may never approach 100,000 robots a year like welding, but definitely it will be north of 20,000, 30,000 robots, that type of thing. And that's going to be good for us. That's going to be good for AV&R and all of our friends in the material removal ecosystem. There's just a few things holding that back. Not quite there yet. There are not, let's face it, there's not a lot of integrators out there like the AV&Rs of the world. You guys are very unique what you do. And there's going to be more. And it doesn't mean you're going to get squeezed out or anything. There's going to, like I said, the rising tide will lift all the boats, but you're one of the leaders, no doubt. And that's going to be exciting to see more and more integrators getting interested in these applications.
Every year we do the exercise of, just kind of scanning who's out there, who's doing what type of jobs and stuff like that, of integration, and who's in the finishing world. And, the number of integrators has grown quite a bit throughout time. So it is definitely a growing field. Do you have a sense of, like, let's compare it to welding, since we have that as a benchmark of 100,000 robots. And there's a lot of, in terms of the number of welding jobs out there versus compared to the number of finishing jobs, is there a lot of finishing is it comparative in terms of the amount of work that it needs to be done?
I believe it's comparative, and you're right. There is the AWS and does a phenomenal job in welding, and training welders, certifying welders.
What's AWS?
The American Welding Society.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep. They're kind of the governing body for certification, and of course they're a big supporter of the various trade shows and welding curriculum. You when you go to trade schools and get trained. Now, grinding, sanding, polishing, deburring, linishing. I mean, you and I can talk shop about those applications.
There's a lot of language.
Right. But let's just say grinding. Grinding is a skilled trade. Not as probably well paid as a welder. Probably not as whatever you want to call it, specialized. However, you and I know that an untrained grinder can destroy a workpiece very easily. And so, like you and I have seen, the more expensive the part, the more likely they have been over the years to adopt automation.
Yeah.
And And I can say from my own experience, that's definitely been true in the US and Europe. When I was living in China, they're grinding everything with robots,
Hmm.
pots and pans, cutlery, mirrors, I mean, it's kind of, it was very um, eye-opening, and we're seeing, China sort of operates on a different economic model. However, we're definitely seeing this diversification starting to occur in Europe and the United States, where historically manufacturers, you had to be making jet blades or high nickel alloy, knee implants, or,
Yeah.
that those were the only areas that you and I could convince to invest, and it's rapidly becoming uh, way more diverse. And if anybody doesn't think it's hard to get into China these days, but just spend a few days, go get quarantined, and travel around China, and you'll see them using robots to grind everything.
Hmm.
Certainly any type of metal, but composites, stone, plastic, wood, glass. I mean, and I do think part of that comes from the concentration in China of the consumer electronics, that those are unique
Okay.
applications. It's
Yeah.
all done with robots, all the polishing and deburring. And those engineers start to move around into other industries, and it's a natural for them to want to do these applications with a robot. Whereas unless in America or Europe, unless you worked, in Warsaw, Indiana, or in GE Bromont, you're not used
Yeah.
to seeing a robot do grinding.
Yeah.
And um, but I think that's changing. And I guess, long answer to your question, Michael, I don't have an answer to um, the how it parallels welding, but certainly anecdotally, subjectively, based on the customers we talk to, very difficult to find anybody that wants to do grinding all day long anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. As a
Those
career,
are, as a career or as a good
right?
job. They're still out
Yeah.
there, but I
Yeah.
think maybe even more important that um, a grinder, that the turnover, that, and this is, of course, in the current job market, turnover is it's a structural, it's a huge issue for the manufacturing industry. However, in grinding, sanding, polishing, deburring, a job that's dirty, dusty, dangerous, demeaning, the turnover is higher. And so we've never seen the amount of pull and interest that we're seeing right now to automate those jobs. Uh, and it's not just about, we're going to replace the human with a robot. It's
Yeah.
about, we're going to improve the consistency, the quality. We're also going to improve the lives of our employees so they can work on more important things for our company.
That's maybe a good segue into what you guys are doing at 3M. I, I first caught on to it. I think it was one of your LinkedIn posts, but the inspect and repair of paint defects.
Oh yeah.
So you guys have been working with customers and have a
Yep.
solution for this. So how did
Right.
you guys come in? How did that come about, and what is
Oh,
that?
that's a great story, Michael, and I think we could do a whole podcast on the paint shop in automotive assembly. But over the years, I've been in hundreds of assembly plants around the world: Europe,
Yeah.
Asia, U.S., Latin America, and I always I always will frequently tell the story about how when I was a kid, we went on a field trip to where? To the St. Paul Ford assembly plant, right? Which was Henry Ford built that plant right on the river, hydroelectric power. Um, that plant dates me, but now it's been closed. However, when I toured that plant, all the welding, all the painting, all the
Okay.
undercoating spray was being done by human operators. And I'll never forget that. I mean, it was so cool. Um, you know, as a grade school student to go on the tour of St. Paul Ford Assembly. Well, fast forward, before that plant closed, that was certainly one of our larger customers in the US for what? For sandpaper, for resin fiber discs,
Okay.
for grinding silicon bronze welds and in the body shop, and then the whole E-coat primer and clear coat sanding of those Ford Rangers that they used to make there.
Mm.
And of course, I'm walking through and I see, oh, there aren't any people painting the car anymore. It's all robots. Same with the undercoating. In many cases, the welding is pretty much automated. But there were always humans doing the sanding,
Okay.
and that really bugged me. And so I think this trend, it started in Europe, and there's an integrator in Landshut, Germany, which is about a half
Okay.
hour from Munich Airport, and I somehow I visited them probably 2017, 2016. I think we met them at the Automate show in Chicago, and they said, "Yeah, come on." And so I was living in China. I was in Europe. I visited them, and they showed me all these videos of mainly primer sanding with robots
Okay.
in automotive assembly. And they said, "Yeah, this is kind of a niche thing. However, what's going to be big is automated clear coat repair." And then my eyes lit up, like, because I know that's it's called the finesse deck. The 3M has a finesse it system that is used by many assembly plants around the world, and it's a stage in when you're producing the car, where if there's a defect in the paint, it can really have a tremendous drain on the overall quality score of the car.
Yep.
And if one of those paint defects makes it into the dealer network, or God forbid to a consumer, the automotive company has to send a technician out to repair it, and the costs are astronomical. So they very much do not want escapes of the plant. And an average car body, just because of dust particles or drips or what have you, probably has I don't know, around 10 defects, and they need it. Today they're repaired by humans with
Okay.
a sander, random orbit sander,
Yep.
and then that gets sanded, and then it gets buffed out with a little shot of a buffing compound. And so if you just think about every car coming down automotive assembly through the paint shop, the last step in the paint shop is often the finesse deck. And there's a swarm of human operators in close quarters. They all have masks on. They have their dust, their lint-free suits on and all that. And they're using their hands, eyes, to find those defects. And
Yep.
so with our partners, our ecosystem partners, I mentioned ASUS, they're one of them, that we have a system now that finds the defect, characterizes it, um, and then also ultimately gets a signal into the robot on how to repair that defect. Is it a crater? Is it a drip? Is it a lint? Is it a piece of hair? The vision system that recognizes what it is, and then there's a specific recipe to repair that and
Yeah.
keep up. And we're working with, I'd say, pretty much all the automotive companies right now on this application. It's critical to their paint shop of the future, or the lights out paint shop. They have a vision. They not if, but when there will be a lights out paint shop and got a ways to go, but robotic sand and polish is a robotic finesse it is a critical part of that. So thanks for asking about that. That's one of my favorite applications, and it's not just for the automotive industry. Really, it's any painted surface.
Yeah.
So
And I didn't realize that every
yeah.
car is getting touch-ups. I assumed, because I've seen,
Oh,
I did my co-op at GM Truck in Oshawa,
mhm.
and so I had a bird's eye view of the body
Yeah.
shop. I didn't spend enough time on the paint shop, I guess, because I know there's some robots in there, and I assumed that they had that process dialed in,
Yeah,
that the
some of
the
those
finish is okay.
some of those robots are doing inspection,
Okay.
and that can be done, deflectometry or 3D scanning and things like that. But there's very few plants that have robots actually sanding and polishing the cars. Now, it's coming more and more popular, especially the people that are building the EVs, Michael. Those guys,
Yeah.
those plants have big capital budgets, and they are frequently redoing the plant layout because there's often not much enough room on the paint deck to put in 8 or 12 robots. Where are you going to put them
Yeah. Okay.
with the
Yep.
reach and everything? So eventually those plants too, those brownfield sites, will be retrofitted or whatever with robots someday. But now the focus is on the newer lines. And yeah, and it can be a misnomer too, because most of the car body at that stage, it's just a painted car body. It doesn't have wheels on it. It doesn't have the um, the engine axle, all this, the interiors, all that, and that's where the finesse deck is. It's
Okay.
before, kind of almost before it goes into assembly, and then there are other heavy repair. I mean, if the paint has a huge gouge in it,
Gosh, and that, yeah,
that
okay. Yeah.
that part has to be shifted to heavy repair, and then there is final inspection, before the car drives out, as well. But
Yeah.
so anyway, I'm sure my automotive guys out there will be correcting me on how I just described it, but that's
Very
it's a
cool.
really important segment for us.
Yeah. Uh, the other interesting thing and you talked a lot about startups. Um,
Hmm.
I just, when we're preparing, I just realized that you guys, 3M has a venture program for startups. So have you
Yeah.
guys have you guys gone into the robotic startup world, and do you guys have some in your portfolio?
Uh, we have, like a lot of big companies, we have a venture arm that invests in startups that are complementary. Because 3M it's still a conglomerate,
Yep.
healthcare, consumer, safety, industrial, and we have an electronics business as well. And so we are scouting the globe for people that we can invest in. Uh, I can say it's public. We made an investment in a company called Gray Matter Robotics. They're out of USC, a collection of disciples of S.K. Gupta, great guy, the director out there at USC. Um, uh, and they started a company called Gray Matter Robotics that's pretty much exclusively focused, Michael, on material removal, sanding, polishing, and grinding, and making that. That's a classic example of one of the startups, and they attended the A3 Business Forum. In fact, I have to give it. They joined the A3, and that's how we were introduced to them.
Hmm.
Certainly I'd
Yeah.
never heard of them until they joined the A3, and we met at one of these conferences, and kind of the rest is history. We're not a big investor, but they're backed by some pretty big venture capital
Yeah.
firms, like all of them are out there. But
Yeah.
we're on the prowl. That's the one I'd say robotics venture that 3M is, made public.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we're on our march to get to the finishing space to 100,000 robots a year. So there's lots of room for people to solve problems and to go after it.
Yep.
So coming out of A3, what the business forum, what are the big topics you're looking for in 2022?
Yeah, yeah. In the automation industry, I do think that a big theme for 2022 and beyond is this, nothing against automotive, trust
Yeah.
me, we love automotive customers, but this continuing accelerated diversification out of automotive. Automotive can be a very cyclical business, as we know. Just look at what's going on with the chip shortage and all that. So that's going to be good for the robotics industry. And the leaders of A3 use that data, the statistics, to drive that home. That broader metalworking, healthcare is
Yeah.
another area. Agriculture, you mentioned, is another area. Another area, construction, is another area that's seen drawing attention of startup companies and the industry. So this continued diversification away from automotive, especially in North America, I'd say one of the other themes that was talked about in all the committee meetings I attended, as well as by many of the speakers, is that um, we cannot do everything ourselves. That the way we improve people's quality of lives and improve the performance of our companies is being really good at certain things.
Mhm.
And that means we have a need for partnerships. And so a lot of talk, um, and I learned this from my boss, Deva, whom you've met,
Yeah.
um, talks about the ecosystem. And Deva attended the A3 Business Forum for the first time, and that had an impact. By the fourth day, everybody is talking about the ecosystem, and that's what it is. It's kind of a maybe historically nebulous English word, but it really is an ecosystem, and we we can't do it ourselves. We need partners, strategic partners, um, in to solve our customers' problems. And so I think that was ended up being, maybe it wasn't one of the big themes going into the event, but I would say by the end of the event, definitely everybody was talking about the
Yeah.
ecosystem. And hey, you want to start connecting dots in the ecosystem, attend the A3 Business Forum. That's where the action is. So that next one will be in a year, and I certainly encourage your listeners to attend and reach out if they're interested in that group.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've got to get down to one of them too.
Yep.
This year, unfortunately, I wasn't able to make it. Um, so another question, and this is looking into 2022, and this is a more personal one. So I don't
Yeah.
know. Do you have? I can start. I always like to ask what people like to do in their spare time, and so for me in 2022, I'm a big cyclist. Last year, I think I ended up around 4,000 kilometers on my bike. So my goal is to beat
Wow.
that this year. I don't know how I'm going to find the time. That's
And that's
the hard part.
on the road, right? That's not Peloton bike, right?
No, that's road. I don't count the Peloton
Excellent.
stuff. That's secret because we're kind
Okay.
of competitive here. So I have to keep
Great.
my secrets so I can keep ahead of my buddies. But so what's your goals for it, or what do you hope to fill your spare time with in 2022?
Oh, my spirit. Well, a lot of people that know me know I have young kids, Michael. So that they keep me busy
Yeah.
and getting them to their skating lessons and
Okay.
their art classes, swimming lessons, gymnastics, violin lessons. I'm still living the dream, you know,
Yeah,
of young children.
I'm with
And
you.
and you know, they consume practically um, all of my time. I think that you know, for our family, and it's fine. This is known. I also was telling everybody this down at the A3 Business Forum. We're in the process. We're moving to Austin, Texas.
Okay.
So now I'm very lucky. 3M has a new program called Work Your Way, where
Okay.
you can work from anywhere. Um, and my boss is very supportive. My wife also works at 3M. She has a new job down in Austin where it
Okay.
requires her to be down there. So I'm that is, you know, we want to move, probably move in April and get the
April. Okay.
family settled. And I'm so excited to be reaching out to the Southwest Research Institute, the Tesla Gigafactory, everything that's in Austin. There's a lot of, well, actually, Austin
It's a
was
big
named,
magnet right now.
it
A
was
lot of
named
people are
one of
moving to
the, yeah,
Texas.
one of the top cities in the world.
Yeah.
Along, even Tokyo was on this top 5 list with Austin, Texas as a robotics hub. A lot of startups. So that's that move now is really consuming all my waking hours outside of work, Michael, if you know
Yeah, I
what I
bet.
mean. So
I bet.
hobbies, probably a real, my true hobbies, skiing, tennis, be on hold a little bit until we get
Okay.
settled down there.
Sounds like you have your priorities right. Good. Well, best of luck with the move. And I really appreciate the time today. It's been fascinating to walk through some of the topics coming out of A3, and I think we've got a good year ahead of us. And I look forward to being part of yours and 3M's ecosystem and tackling some of these problems.
Absolutely, and we'll be a few of us will be headed up, as you know, to Quebec, which has also become a very hot spot for robotic innovation. So looking forward to seeing you in person.
Right on. Very
Okay.
good. Well, have a great day, Carl. Thank you.
Yeah, have a good weekend.
You too. So this concludes the episode of Robotics for All podcast by AV&R. If you don't want to miss another single episode, don't forget to subscribe to our show in your favorite podcast app. Thank you very much, everyone, and we'll talk again soon.